again, Buckeye fans. It's time for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I am Chip Minnich.
Chip, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Michael.
I certainly enjoyed my New Year's Day with a big Ohio State victory over the Washington Huskies in a game that, the final score was close, but the game didn't really seem all that close to me. We have, I don't know how much we have to talk about, but it's a lot. And a lot of things happened since you and I last spoke, but I guess we'll start out with the obvious, the Rose Bowl, and I don't think we'll go as in depth, as we normally do, because it's been a few, several days since the game, and so much else has happened since then that it almost seems like it was, a month ago. But just give me your overall impressions of Ohio State sending out Urban Meyer with a victory and giving him his bucket list item of a Rose Bowl victory.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that idea of like a bucket list of a Rose Bowl victory. I'm very happy for Urban Meyer to be able to close out a tremendous career at Ohio State. I have to confess that the game in and of itself, like you said a few moments ago, it seems like it was so long ago, but it was just less than a week as we were recording this. And when I was watching it at home, I remember feeling very, very embarrassed about the idea that I thought, I had predicted that it was going to be a really close game. I thought, 42-28. And at the half, it seemed like Ohio State was just going to steamroll Washington. And I don't know if it was that Ohio State took their foot off the gas, if Washington started figuring out things that would work, if it was a combination of both. Like you said, it certainly seemed the final score seemed a lot closer than it actually was. But I'm just happy that Ohio State was able to send Coach Meyer out on a winning note in the Rose Bowl.
And Chip, what a legacy this guy has. I mean, we don't really have to go into all of the things that Urban Meyer accomplished in his career, overall, not even at Ohio State. But if you look at his 7 years at Ohio State, he had an undefeated season in a year which the team was not eligible for the postseason, in an unprecedented move by the NCAA to deny that, given the fact that there was no failure to monitor charge or lack of institutional control. He still went undefeated. He won a national championship, obviously. He won a Rose Bowl, a Cotton Bowl, a Sugar Bowl, a Fiesta Bowl, and would have had the entire set of major bowl games had Philly Brown not muffed a punt in the Orange Bowl.
I never thought about it that way, thinking back to that muffed punt. But you're right. I mean, it's a tremendous legacy, and I have to confess, as cherished as that 2014 national championship is always going to remain for me, the 7-0 victory, the 7-0 record against Michigan is something that I think will take number one on the things that on the list of things that I will remember during Urban Meyer's tenure.
Right. I mean, obviously a huge part of his Ohio State legacy is going undefeated against the school up north. But yeah, I don't want to minimize Clemson University. I know that game was still in the third quarter, but Ohio State had a 9-point lead and was getting the ball back in good field position when Philly Brown muffed that punt. And really, it was one of those games that felt like it was really starting to turn into a big lopsided win for Ohio State, and that muff punt recovered by Clemson allowed Clemson to regain momentum, and they were able to come back and win the game and hold off Ohio State at the end when Braxton Miller was, he was playing with an arm he could barely raise above his shoulder to throw the ball. And, I don't want to take anything away from them, but I think that Orange Bowl finishes completely differently if Philly Brown fields that punt and Ohio State goes on to score again on that drive, because that would have been a pretty difficult thing for the Tigers to overcome. But nearly a complete set for Urban Meyer. And certainly if you look around the country, there are not many coaches that can claim a national championship, a Rose Bowl, a Cotton Bowl, a Sugar Bowl, and a Fiesta Bowl victory. Those are some mighty big accomplishments.
And the way that he came in and immediately stabilized what had been a very, let's just say it, a very tumultuous football program. It wasn't really Luke Fickell's fault per se. Luke Fickell was kind of dealt, a very difficult hand with the forced firing of Jim Tressel late in May of 2011, and multiple players being suspended. Terrell Pryor decided to cut bait and bolt for the NFL. So Luke Fickell did as well as he could during some very difficult time. The national media spotlight certainly did not help Luke Fickell during that time. But as soon as Urban Meyer came on as Ohio State's head coach in November, after Luke Fickell decided, after it was decided that Luke Fickell would not have the permanent job, it just seemed as though, okay, Ohio State fans had a way forward, from what had been a very painful year. Urban Meyer immediately brought a sense of calm, and on the recruiting side of things, that his reputation for being able to attract some of the best talent in the high school ranks was evident almost immediately.
Instant credibility, I think, is what was restored with that hire by Gene Smith, a home run hire by Gene Smith. He had to talk a guy who was not coaching out of the broadcast booth, and of course, there were some personal things that Urban still had to deal with his family on managing his health and managing the way he was going to be spending time with them, when possible, and that kind of thing. And they, the infamous contract that he made with his family to come back into coaching. It couldn't have been. I mean, I know people that don't like Ohio State or other fans of other Big Ten programs just probably consider that Ohio State falling upward, going from Jim Tressel to Urban Meyer after the one tumultuous year, the zombie year, as I like to refer to it as.
Zombie year. Yeah, that's true. I mean, because there have been a number of other historically strong programs that have had their ups and downs. For example, it seems as though Alabama, that they're perpetually in the national championship, in the national championship game, but we're not old enough to forget. There was a time when Alabama was kind of an afterthought.
Yeah, they really were.
Not so distant past until Nick Saban.
Yeah, I mean they had several coaching stints that didn't go well, or they may have gone well only one or two seasons. I know that there were a number of coaches that went through there for a while that were getting 3 years out of guys. Mike Shula was one. There were a few others, but yeah, there was believe it or not, a time when Alabama wasn't dominating the college football landscape. But getting back to Urban's bucket list win, Ohio State came out and that game kind of started a little bit how we thought it might, a little bit of feeling out process. Ohio State was able to take the lead on a Paris Campbell touchdown reception. Washington came back, kicked a field goal, and that was all the scoring for the first quarter. And it did look like a defensive game was shaping up, which is sort of surprising for Ohio State fans, I'm sure. But then Ohio State was able to flex some muscles a little bit in the second quarter, took touchdowns from Johnny Dixon on a 19-yard pass, and then right before the half, Rashad Berry with a nice catch, maybe his best catch as a Buckeye, on a quick 1-yard pass from Haskins, and it was 21-3 at the break. Ohio State able to stop Washington's first drive and then come down and score on a J.K. Dobbins run. Made it 28-3, and it was 28-3 into the fourth quarter, although Ohio State sort of stopped being able to move the ball in the latter part of the third quarter. It was, like you said, not sure if it was a lack of focus, taking the foot off the gas, Washington making some adjustments. I'm sure it was a combination of some things. Maybe some emotional stuff started to bubble up on the Ohio State sideline as you get the big lead, and you think, wow, this is it for Urban. I'm going to think about this, and I'm going to enjoy playing for him for just another 15 minutes or so. And and maybe even on the coaching staff's part, certainly I didn't think the play calling was very good throughout the most of the second half. It certainly wasn't what it was in the first half. It didn't really put the team in a good position, and they were seemingly in a third and long throughout the last 18 or 19 minutes of the game. Washington able to come back with a few scores in the fourth quarter cosmetically to make it a 28-23 game. Ohio State nearly with a pick two on the last 2-point conversion try, but didn't quite pull it off. And then to me, some people will say, well, that it was a close game. They almost blew it. But to me, Washington never had the ball with a chance to tie or take the lead. So it was never in doubt in my mind. It was never a chance for Washington to come all the way back. So a 28-23 final. My overall thoughts, Chip, great first half for Mike Weber. They really seemed to stop giving him the ball in the second half.
And that was disappointing because, and I'm sure you have the final stats available, or possibly you just know them, but it certainly seemed from my vantage point in the first half that if they kept giving the ball to Mike Weber, the possibility that he could also break that 1,000-yard threshold again in his final game as an Ohio State Buckeye. And then, like you said, I completely agree with you. They kind of went away from Weber, and the play calling was suspect by Ohio State in a number of different ways. Ohio State was also the beneficiary of some very suspect play calling by Chris Peterson. When it certainly seemed as though Washington could have made some better choices. The Brendan White interception that was almost 2 points. That was probably like the biggest defensive highlight of the second half. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I feel bad getting back to it, though. I genuinely feel bad for Mike Weber because it certainly seemed as though he was on pace to get to that 1,000 yards and just fell short.
Yeah, he only finished with 15 carries. He had 96 yards, no touchdowns. Dobbins had 7 carries for 24 yards and a touchdown. But Weber was averaging 6.4 yards a carry. Dobbins only 3.4, but it really seemed like Dobbins got more looks in the second half. And again, in those really bizarre play calls, it was like those throw at the line of scrimmage, which those weren't working all day, and then a 1-yard run from Dobbins, and then an obvious third and long passing situation that didn't come off, and then a punt. And that was basically the story of the second half for the offense. I did think that, Paris Campbell offensively had a nice game. He had 71 yards receiving, 11 catches, a touchdown. Defensively, fantastic game for Jeffrey Okudah. Big time coming out party for Jeffrey Okudah. Brendan White had a good game. I really enjoyed watching those two play. And even a pretty decent game for Kendall Sheffield.
Yes, Kendall Sheffield, who has often been the target, fairly or unfairly, of a lot of the Ohio State Twitterverse for the way that he plays. He certainly had a great game. I'm also glad that you brought up Jeffrey Okudah. He had some timely plays on tipping the ball. He certainly served notice that going into 2019 that he will, if not be a starter, certainly be in the rotation to be so because of the way that he played. And Brendan White certainly did nothing to show that he is not going to, he is not going to fade into the background whatsoever. Like, he's definitely going to be in that safety rotation along with Jordan Fuller, who announced after the Rose Bowl that he will be returning to Ohio State for his senior year.
Yeah, how big is that to have the two starting safeties come back next year?
Well, quite substantially large, considering all of the big coaching turnover that's going to be that we'll be discussing on the defensive side of the ball. Because when you're talking about a transition to a new coaching staff, more than likely on the majority of them coming on the defensive side of the ball, you need some people that have had some experience. So Jordan Fuller, his experience and his consistent play is going to be a welcome sight in 2019.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a lot more about the sort of some of the announcements already, the announcements that may yet come, and what the legacy of the seniors are going to be here in just a bit. Fuller had 9 tackles in the Rose Bowl to lead all Buckeyes, 8 solo. Brendan White also with 8 solo tackles. He didn't have any assists, but Brendan White did have 2 tackles for loss. It was I thought a decent game for the defense. I thought that you and I talked about Jake Browning makes like one really bonehead play a game, and he got away with his bonehead play in this game. He had a really late pass back against the grain that could have been picked off, but wasn't. But other than that, I thought Washington gave us just about what we thought, other than we saw Myles Gaskins, hit some 11, 12-yard runs in the second half, but we didn't see that big run that you and I both expected him to break.
Yeah, he certainly had a very solid game. You could see, getting back to Urban Meyer, you could see when they would cut the television cameras over to Urban Meyer, him getting frustrated with the defense, their ineffectiveness, especially in that fourth quarter. But yeah, I was pleased with the fact that Ohio State did not give up the big play that we saw so often during the 2018 season.
Yeah, it was kind of a second half for the defense where the pass rush seemed to disappear at times. Washington definitely found out that they could move the ball when Robert Landers was in. If they double-teamed Robert Landers, they had some success getting to the second level with their running backs. Not so much when Davon Hamilton was in. But Chase Young didn't really have a very impressive game for me. He did have a sack. But only 2 tackles, not really a dominating performance by him. Didn't really see a dominating performance by Draymond Jones. He had 3 solo tackles in his final game as a Buckeye. So it was a solid first half for the defense, but the second half, they, just like the offense, they sort of tailed off a bit, and I put some of that on the offense for keeping them on the field so much.
Yeah, a player that I don't know how many, like in terms of total tackles, but that just in terms of for the future that I was impressed with was freshman defensive end Tyreek Smith, who had there was one play in particular where he was noticeably being held. They didn't call it, but even while he was being held, he was able to make a key tackle on the play, and it just kind of, if anything, it gave me optimism for the future with knowing that Tyreek Smith, being a freshman, he's going to be in that defensive line rotation in 2019.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of good-looking freshmen on this team that are going to blossom and play well in the future. So another win, 13-1 season, a win over Rose Bowl, or win in the Rose Bowl, a win over the rivals. Pretty solid season. Obviously, there was the blip against Purdue. And we were sad to realize that Tyler Trent had passed away just a couple of days ago. In fact, didn't we hear that after the Rose Bowl game? We heard that was
yes,
the case?
Yeah. I believe that. Yeah, he Tyler Trent, a very inspirational young man. As somebody who my father died almost, it'll be 9 years this July, and he died from cancer. I can't imagine what Tyler Trent, for his parents, his family, his friends, being a young man, the way that he faced his impending death with such courage and such grace was truly inspirational. The fact that he didn't step on the field for Purdue, but he certainly inspired the Boilermakers back in October. And, if anything, I'm sure that will always, for those players for Purdue, that will Tyler Trent, that's going to be something that they'll remember for the rest of their respective lives.
Yeah, it's really hard to be mad about that loss the more you think about Tyler Trent.
Yeah,
so
puts things in their proper perspective. How's that?
Really does. And anyway, I'm not a millennial. I'm not spoiled. So I think a 13-1 season with a win over Michigan and a win in the Rose Bowl is pretty darn nice.
It absolutely is. And we have no idea what the final voting will be, but it would be completely shocking if Ohio State doesn't wind up either number 4 or number 5 in the country when it's all said and done.
Yep, another top 5 a season for Urban Meyer for sure. So we talked about the Rose Bowl, talked a little bit about Urban's legacy. Certainly he will be seen as, if not the greatest coach to lead Ohio State, then one of the top 2. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I when you think about, we talked about his record against Michigan, and fair or unfair, it's the kind of thing that's how you're judged at Ohio State, and you can't go better than like 0 losses, and Urban Meyer, Ohio State fans, like you said, they're kind of, regardless of whether we're talking our millennial fans or otherwise, I think there's been a lot of Ohio State fans who have just grown accustomed and expecting of wins over that team up north, and that's thanks largely in part to to Jim Tressel in 2001, who kind of got that completely turned around into Urban Meyer. I'm with you. I think anytime that you can win a game against that team up north is something to be savored. So, to your point, Urban Meyer, if you rank them, Woody Hayes, Urban Meyer, you're certainly not going to hear too much disagreement from me.
Yeah, I mean, and you could just go by purely Michigan record, purely winning percentage. It's hard to argue against Urban Meyer being at the top of that list. And I say top 2. I don't want to take anything away from Jim Tressel, but Jim Tressel, objectively, when you match his record up against Urban Meyer's, they are not the same. There is definitely an edge to Urban Meyer's, in his column when you talk about winning percentage. The fact that he never lost to Michigan, although Tressel only did 1 time, I believe, and each having that national championship. And on Tressel got his team to 2 other championship games, but they didn't go well. But overall, I think that's your podium is Woody, Tressel, and Meyer, and those are certainly 3 of your 4 on the Ohio State coaching Mount Rushmore for football.
Completely agree.
All right, so hey, thanks, Urban. At least he went out sort of on his own terms. Of course, there was a little bit of a problematic final season. He did have the suspension, but he didn't go out like Woody Hayes. He didn't go out like Jim Tressel. He went out when he decided it was time to go out.
And I guess the reason I'm kind of stammering over this is that it's just mind-boggling to me that when you think about the last head coach to leave Ohio State on his own terms was Paul Brown, and that was because of World War II. that Paul, and I'm not laughing at the idea of World War II. I'm laughing at the fact that Paul Brown, just how it was back in those days, that almost every man, if you could, chose to enlist, and Paul Brown was no exception to that. But when you think about every coach, successful or not successful, that followed Paul Brown up until Urban Meyer, that every one of them, no matter how well they did at Ohio State or for how long they were at Ohio State, they were asked to leave by the Ohio State powers that be. And Urban Meyer is the first in almost 70, I guess you would say 70 years to kind of break tradition. So it's nice that Urban Meyer, I agree with you that the final season was marred with a lot of the Zach Smith controversy at the beginning of the season, and then was kind of finishing up with Urban Meyer's health scare. But I'm glad to see Urban Meyer is leaving on his own terms, and I wish him and his family nothing but the best, and my sincere appreciation for everything that he did for Ohio State football beginning in November of 2011.
I wrote a column in 2010, I think it was, about when I was at our Honor Defend, about how good Ohio State fans had it with Thad Matta and Jim Tressel. And never could I have imagined it getting better. But in fact, on the football side, it did get better. And on the basketball side, arguably it is on the way to getting better than what Thad made it. So enjoy these times, because these times are not going to last forever, I guess is what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Chip, the seniors, we got to talk a little bit about them. The senior class going out. Of course, everyone who dons the scarlet and gray becomes a part of the historical tapestry of Ohio State football. It's they are part of the overall picture. In some of them may be tiny footnotes, like some of the walk-ons that never really played, but then some of them will go down in legendary status. So before we talk about sort of the underclassmen who are going or staying, let's talk a little bit about the some of the seniors. We won't touch on every one because otherwise it's going to be a 3-hour podcast, and we'll talk about the ones that sort of at least were in our consciousness. There were I don't want to slight some of the walk-ons or guys that didn't play, but we have a finite amount of time to talk about this. So without any further ado, Brady Taylor. What is Brady Taylor's legacy as a senior at Ohio State?
Very good question. I think my first impression of Brady Taylor is somebody who, I guess you would say, was kind of like that consummate team guy. And the reason I'm saying that is Brady Taylor, you could have made the argument, maybe not a strong argument, but you could have made the argument, like, if there was going to be a guy that was going to really moan and complain about how unfair things were, his final year in Columbus, Brady Taylor could have been one of those guys, because for the last several years, every Ohio State fan was kind of hearing Brady Taylor's name as, well, he's going to be the eventual successor to, fill in the blank, at the center position. First it was Elfline, then it was Billy Price, and you thought, okay, coming into this year it's going to be Brady Taylor, and then next it's Michael Jordan. And Brady Taylor, I never heard a peep out of Brady Taylor about how he was misled or lied to or any of those kind of things. Instead of being a cancer within the locker room, I heard nothing but positive things about Brady Taylor. So that's my impression of Brady Taylor in terms of his legacy.
Right. No transfer. I'm not getting playing time. I'm going to leave. That kind of thing. It was. He wanted to be a Buckeye. He went out as a Buckeye. Isaiah Prince. He's a guy who became a starter, became an important player his final 2 seasons in Columbus.
Yes. Very talented. I wish him nothing but the best at the NFL level, because he has the skill level. We saw it more so during the 2017 season than this past season. Mm-hmm. He kind of had, the inconsistencies. I mean, some maddening false starts, especially during the Rose Bowl.
2 in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So the talent is there, but Isaiah Prince was one of those guys when I look at, the fact that when he signed with Ohio State, he was one of those guys that on National Signing Day back in 2015 decided, instead of going to Maryland or going to Alabama or like any of the other top programs that recruited him, he decided to go with Ohio State. So wish him nothing but the best going forward.
Yeah, he tweeted something about that, about how he has to work on his consistency. He has to work on being the best he can be, and he didn't feel like he quite achieved that at Ohio State, I think, and I think some Ohio State fans, the more cynical of us, would probably agree with that. But Isaiah Prince was a valuable member of that offensive line, came in out of Maryland, not normal for Ohio State to go to the East Coast to get linemen, but I think he'll have a good legacy, and I think he'll be on an NFL roster next year. So
yeah, he'll probably be one of those guys. I would have to guess is going to be like a day 3 pick. Not that I'm not necessarily sure what the current projections have him, but I would think just the experience and the size and the talent is there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, as you just said, the consistency. So he's definitely going to be on an NFL roster in some way, shape, or form.
Potential to be maybe a practice squad player for a year or two, and then maybe get some coaching and maybe work his way up. Malcolm Pridgeon, he's a guy who had a very important senior year for Ohio State.
Yeah, he was a junior college guy, and the size was always there. I think I'm glad that he took advantage of this past year, and he earned that starting role. He wasn't always the best offensive lineman out there, but I was happy to see that he earned that starting role as a senior.
Of course, Sean Nurnberger is a guy who lost his job as a senior, but he obviously is a guy who contributed, all of his years at Ohio State.
Yeah, Sean Nurnberger is one of those fifth-year guys that he contributed on the national championship team in 2014 as a true freshman. So. Not entirely sure what kind of a future he has. Quite commonly, when it comes to place kickers, let's face it, it's very, very rare for NFL teams to invest draft choices, but they usually do invite players into camp, as kind of like that camp leg, so to speak. So stranger things have happened when it comes to place kickers. So hopefully Sean Nurnberger is going to get a shot if he wants one.
And weird things have been happening to kickers. I mean, NFL teams have been going through kickers like never before.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Here's a guy who I think his legacy is one of the greatest wide receiver blockers in Ohio State history, potentially Ohio State's best ever gunner on punts, Terry McLaurin.
And there's another guy that when he gets his shot in the NFL, because I actually mentioned that during the Rose Bowl at one point, because he had a nice play in the Rose Bowl in that capacity, that I mentioned when he gets his shot in the NFL, it's going to be because of his special teams play. The fact that he showed that kind of willingness and determination at the college level, that's going to get him, if not drafted, is going to get him his free agent opportunity with whatever NFL team, and being one of those guys that wants to contribute on special teams. I mentioned it, how stranger things have happened. Certain players make their career just being special teams aces, and Terry McLaurin could be one of those guys.
And he's really not a bad receiver. I mean, he's 6'1", 205, so he's got decent size. And in the NFL, if you can block, you can play wide receiver.
Yes, so. and he also has. I mean, he's not as fast as Paris Campbell, but he has very good speed too. So it wouldn't be surprising to see him playing on some NFL roster, this coming summer.
He may just get better and better. He's one of those guys who maybe somebody takes either in the late round or even goes in as an undrafted free agent and makes a team, and then just comes out of nowhere and ends up, being a part of a normal wide receiver rotation at some point.
Sure.
So. Let's stay in the wide receiver room for Johnny Dixon, a guy who throughout his career had, so many injury problems. You could almost sense any day you were going to see the medical red shirt come, the medical retirement come, and he would be done playing. But Johnny Dixon fought back from a lot of knee issues and really had a stellar senior season.
I want to give major props to Tony Girdman because he had a stellar article about Johnny Dixon on the Ozone, about Dixon's determination, the perseverance that he displayed. As you said, there were many times where Johnny Dixon contemplated hanging up his football cleats, calling it a career, but he kept battling and had many critical receptions. Probably the most notable being last season in 2017 in the comeback win against Penn State, as Gerd referenced in his article. So I'm not sure what kind of NFL future Johnny Dixon may have, because let's face it, NFL teams, they go over like a fine-tooth comb about anyone's previous injury history. So it's not to say that Johnny Dixon isn't worthy of playing in the NFL. I'm just not sure how much or that he'll be downgraded by NFL teams when it comes to the physical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But he certainly has the talent to play at the next level. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that his senior year turnout, his body of work his senior year, maybe give some teams some hope that he can, that maybe those injury problems are in the past and won't, if they use him like Ohio State did in a rotation situation, that he can withstand the punishment. He's one of those few guys. I mean, he's from West Palm Beach, Florida, that I don't follow recruiting really extremely closely most of the time, but I had heard of him. I mean, I live in Orlando, but I had heard of him. I was really excited to see what he could do on the field, and it just became really apparent that this guy's just never going to be healthy. And then all of a sudden, he was healthy enough to play, and he really contributed well. So thanks for the memories, Johnny. I will never forget the long touchdown passes from Dwayne Haskins to Johnny Dixon, which were, as I say, my favorite play in the Ohio State playbook was the long touchdown pass to Johnny Dixon. Paris Campbell is a guy who, they brought him in, and he was going to be that Percy Harvin type, and he couldn't catch. And then he got a little better and a little better and a little better. And Paris Campbell, at the end of the season, was playing some of the best football that we've seen out of any Ohio State wide receiver in recent memory.
He was a high school running back, and I give a lot of credit to Paris Campbell, but also, the Ohio State coaching staff for their faith and belief in Paris Campbell that he could make the transition to being a college wide receiver. And I agree with you. I think Paris Campbell, he showed by the end of his career at Ohio State that he had developed into not necessarily, the most consistent wide receiver, but he's going to be one of these guys that when the NFL Combine comes around, and so much of that, the reason why I always kind of scoff and roll my eyes, so much of that, you're talking about players that are wearing T-shirts and shorts, and and they're not, having to run across the middle and take a crunching hit from a linebacker or a safety. But Paris Campbell, you watch, he's gonna be one of these guys that his name he's going to demonstrate, because his physical skills, especially when it comes to the speed department, are off the charts, and he's going to be one of these guys that his name is going to be among the most impressive performers at the NFL Combine in the next month.
Is he going to be one of those guys who doesn't run the 40 at the Combine but runs it at his pro day?
Now that's a very good question. I'm always one of the, regardless of whether we're talking Ohio State players or otherwise, I'm always one of these guys that say, go out there and show what you can do. If I was Paris Campbell, I would certainly recommend that he should do that, because as you said, and I agree with you, Paris Campbell, his hands are not always the most consistent. So any opportunity you have to show the positives, which in his case, being able to run the 40 in like a 4.3 or possibly even better, I would certainly seize that opportunity if given the chance.
I enjoyed Paris Campbell's career immensely, and it was good to see him get to that 1,000-yard receiving mark, and also to set the receptions mark for a season at Ohio State.
Yeah, the first, I want to say, wasn't he the first 1,000-yard receiver since Michael Jenkins? Has it been that long, or is it?
I don't think it was Michael Jenkins. It might have been. I'm drawing a blank. It was the first in a while, but I don't know if it went all the way back to Jenkins. But
okay,
that would be pretty impressive anyway. 1,000 yards receiving is impressive in college football, but when you think about the way Ohio State rotated receivers, it even makes it more impressive.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, and the fact is, I was giving a lot of praise to Brady Taylor for not being a disruptive force. When you talk about all the receivers that we've mentioned, Terry McLaurin, Johnny Dixon, Paris Campbell, not one of them ever made it about, like all about me, like they were all about the team. And so that is a credit to those guys in terms of their selflessness for a position group that stereotypically is kind of associated with being, prima donnas and being selfish.
I think Zone 6 overachieved this year, and I think big kudos to Brian Hartline for that. And also I think part of the reason that they did overachieve is because they had a real brotherhood in that wide receiver room.
Mm-hmm. And Brian Hartline has the well-deserved promotion to being the permanent wide receivers coach. And when we talk about the rest of the staff changes, it's going to bear watching to see how Brian Hartline does with the Zone 6 group next year without those senior wide receivers again.
Well, our final senior that we'll talk about, Chip, let's stay with Paris Campbell's high school teammate, St. Vincent St. Mary in Akron. Linebacker Dante Booker, what is his legacy as a Buckeye?
That's a tough one. I'm going to just say kind of star-crossed, for lack of a better description. Simply, I think he was Mr. Football for Ohio when he came out, and he certainly had his moments. Sometimes felt as though, was he better at linebacker? Is he better at defensive end? Battled those injuries. There were rumors that he was going to be one of those players that was going to be leaving instead rather than staying for his senior year. Wish him nothing but the best. I have no idea what kind of future he has, if he even wants a future in professional football. Some guys, they decide, that they've had enough and they're content with what they did at the collegiate level. So remains to be seen, but I would say that, star-crossed would be the description I would have for Booker.
He's a guy who really could could work his way into some teams conversations with some work. He's a freak athlete. So he could work his way into some conversations with some combine type drill stuff and good speed. He just never seemed like he grasped what Ohio State's defense was doing, in my opinion.
Yeah, like I said, he'd flash, but then he would disappear. So I just don't know, how much of that was, like you said, him not grasping the defense. How much of it was because of injury issues that were lingering or hampering him. So just not sure what kind of future he has in football, if he even wants one.
Well, let's talk, Chip, about some of the guys who were not seniors but had decisions to make. We knew going into the game that Draymond Jones would not be back, and of course he is turning pro. We did find out that Jordan Fuller, as you mentioned, decided to return, which was that was a nice gift for Ohio State fans. I thought there was a pretty good chance that Fuller would return, and he did. He says that he played okay in 2018. He didn't make the big plays. I think he made a pretty big one against Michigan.
He certainly did. But I mentioned it earlier in the podcast. I think the return of Jordan Fuller, if anything, that's only going to solidify a secondary that, as we saw all too frequently in 2018, definitely needs to become a lot more consistent.
One of the surprises to me, Michael Jordan going pro. He's foregoing his final season. He's a guy who, the coaching staff talked about. We want to move him back to guard next year, and that's his sweet spot. I think Michael Jordan was maybe the most consistent offensive lineman this year for Ohio State, and I'm certain he must have got some good news from from his draft grade to make the decision that he made. But here's a guy who I think maybe if he comes back as a guard next year could have risen a bit higher in the draft.
I agree. That was Michael Jordan's decision was very surprising, especially in light of the fact that the move back to guard seemed like that was going to happen. So now, and wish nothing but the best for Michael Jordan. He's making a decision that he feels is in his best interest for the future. He played very well for 3 years. But now that offensive line position group is going to be certainly under the microscope because out of 5 players, only 4 of the 5 are going to be brand new starters.
He was really going to be the anchor of that team, that offensive line next year. He was going to be the stalwart, the veteran, the leader, and he's a guy who excels at offensive guard. So It's a pity that we won't get to see him back at his at his best spot in his final year, but we do wish him luck, as you mentioned. Um, One of the things that just happened today as we record this, it was a much longer process than either of us expected. Dwayne Haskins finally did announce that he will forego any more eligibility at Ohio State and go pro. It's not a surprise. He's probably going to be the number one quarterback taken in the draft. He is likely a top 3 pick, at least a top 5 pick, considering where quarterbacks that are even mediocre end up going in the NFL draft. Um, Excellent financial decision for this young man. He can always come back and finish his degree with his millions, but there's no guarantee that you stay healthy if you come back for your senior year. So, it seemed like the length of time that Dwayne Haskins spent making this decision indicates to me how difficult this was for him and how much he really considered coming back.
Yeah, as you said, it wasn't a surprise that he's declaring for the NFL because we've been saying that for weeks. I agree with you that it seemed that the longer this process went on, kind of just kind of in the back of your mind thinking like, is he really thinking of coming back again? And but he'll be in a similar vein as what I just described about Paris Campbell. I think Dwayne Haskins is going to put on a show at the NFL Combine, and in a similar vein as what I said about how guys, in t-shirts and shorts, not to get overworked, but the I guess you would say the scarcity of really good quarterbacks coming out for the NFL draft. I think Dwayne Haskins has this very strong potential of demonstrating to NFL teams, if you want a potential franchise quarterback, you're gonna have to move up into the, as you said, like in those top 5 picks to get him, because he won't be on the draft board too long.
Absolutely. One that just happened before we started recording. Benjamin Victor saying he's coming back and he's going to play his senior season at Ohio State.
And he needs to. No disrespect to Ben Victor. I can close my eyes and I can picture his big play against Penn State in Happy Valley earlier this year.
The biggest play. His biggest play.
Certainly. But it's also, I can close my eyes and I can think of many times where he dropped the ball with kind of just, how is that even possible? So
big drop in the Michigan game when he was wide open.
Right. So you have those kind of moments that kind of screams to me that you're not ready for the next level. The physical talent, we just referenced the biggest play against or at Penn State is there. It's just, as we keep talking about, like Isaiah Prince, trying to become more consistent. That's what Ben Victor next year, even more so in light of the departures of Paris Campbell, Johnny Dixon, and Terry McLaurin, the opportunity to play probably more so in Zone 6. I think that I think it can only help him boost his NFL draft stock for the 2020 NFL draft.
I agree. A little too inconsistent throughout his career, Ben Victor, but we talked about him in the middle of the season when he had made, I think 3 or 4 weeks in a row, he had made a big play for a touchdown, and we started to talk about, is this a guy who could make the jump to the NFL early based on this? And we both, I think, agreed that if he kept playing like that he would maybe jump into that conversation. But he obviously had some ups and downs throughout the remainder of the season, and I think this is a good decision for him. I think if he can get another year with Brian Hartline working with him and maybe become a more consistent player with his hands, I think he's got all the rest of the tools. He's got better speed than most people think because he's sort of one of those lanky guys, and he's good in traffic. He can high point the ball. He's tall. He can go up and get it. He's got a lot to like. If you're an NFL coach looking for a wide receiver, he's got that type of body you're looking for. So this could be a huge thing for him, but also huge for Ohio State because they were in danger of losing a lot of Zone 6. And, I think KJ Hill still hasn't made his decision yet, but we expect Austin Mack to come back after his midseason injury. So it's Victor and Mack and potentially Hill coming back that would really give Ohio State a great receiving core for the new starting quarterback next season.
As you said, a new starting quarterback, so the opportunity to kind of develop chemistry with whoever the new starting quarterback is going to be. I think Ben Victor, as we said before, I think he made the right decision.
Yeah. All right. I think that is all of the guys who've made their decisions so far. Am I missing anyone?
Well, I mean, we talked about Mike Weber, and we didn't talk about him tonight because it's been so long.
Right. Mike Weber, we didn't mention on this show, but yes, he's turning pro. And
Nick Bosa.
And Nick Bosa, we've known about for many moons. And in fact, I'm sure you read his Players Tribune article.
Yes.
Yeah, and in which he talked about the fact that he took some heat, but there was no saving his season with the injury he had. He was out for the year, and once he knew that his season was over, there wasn't really much that he could do. He wasn't coming back. He wanted to go rehab. He spent some time with his brother. He mentioned being in kind of in a dark place, because I think a lot of people don't realize that when you go through training camp and several years with your teammates and it's over, that's a pretty big hit. That's a pretty big emotional hit, and you got to remember how old these guys are. That's a difficult time, and certainly I didn't begrudge him his decision to do what he did, and even withdrawing from school and concentrating on getting better. And recovering from his injury. That was all a decision it was very personal to him, and he felt it was in his best interest. I have nothing but respect for the kid, and I wish him the best of luck. And I would hope that he goes number 1 overall, but I really would rather him go to my team.
I think everyone would rather that he went to their respective team, but yeah, I wish him nothing but the best. For those people that are being critical of Nick Bosa for not trying to come back, keep in mind, to those individuals, you're not the one who has to deal with the consequences of that decision. Nick Bosa made a decision that is in his best interest for the future. Wish him nothing but the best. I sincerely hope that his rehab continues to go well, and that he is well positioned to be that first pick for the 2019 NFL draft.
And the people that criticize whether he's a team guy or not, he was playing with an injury prior to it to the injury becoming what it ended up becoming. And so he was trying to be out there for his brothers and for his teammates. So, and maybe even to his detriment a little bit, because it did end up, getting it injured worse. But he wasn't going to be able to come back until mid-December at the very earliest, according to what his doctors were telling him. And then you're really talking about a January 1 game. You're rushing yourself to get back in football shape, which is not a smart maneuver. So I think he made the right decision, and I'm going to miss Nick Bosa, but I'm going to watch him in the NFL, just like I watched Joey. So
absolutely.
Okay, so with Weber out, the question I have for you before we move on to the quarterback situation is J.K. Dobbins an every down back?
Wow. I think he has the potential to be. It's going to be interesting to see with Ryan Day as the head coach, to see if he has any kind of different thoughts on the matter. For the last few years, Ryan Day, as being the good soldier for Urban Meyer, who's to say that Urban Meyer wanted more of that rotation that existed between Dobbins and Weber. So I think he has the potential to be. I also believe that there are a lot of talented players in that running back room who are worthy of spelling J.K. Dobbins. So it's going to be interesting to see, put it that way.
Yeah. Now, what do you think of the Well, let's just say, uh, of these two potentialities, which one do you like better? And I will present them this way. J.K. Dobbins, if he splits time, is he better off splitting time, or I should say, is Ohio State better off if he splits time with the, um, let's call him diminutive in some ways, Demario McCall, 5'9", 193, or Master Teague, 5'11", 215, a bigger back?
I'm putting down for Master Teague, and this is not meant to take a shot at Demario McCall. I think Demario McCall, he demonstrated his ability to be kind of more of that like change of pace third down back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Demario McCall, kind of carrying the same kind of load that Mike Weber did this year. I don't know how effective Demario McCall would be in the long run. I think Master Teague, as you said, he's listed at that 215 pounds. I think Teague is kind of more physically suited to carry the ball a lot more. So we'll see.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea, the little thunder and lightning idea with Teague stepping into the Weber role, but there's something about Demario McCall. Every time he touches the ball, he's just kind of electric.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to see maybe even more platooning, or maybe some two back sets with a couple of guys in, and give the other team something to look at. But let's get to that quarterback situation now before we get into the coaching situation, Chip. The rumor was when Dwan Mathis flipped his commitment to Georgia that Justin Fields would be transferring. Now, Georgia was subsequently knocked out, or they had their bowl game, I should say, and they were done for the year. And as it turns out, Justin Fields made it official this week, and he is on campus. He is early enrolled. We do not know if he'll be available to play in 2019, because you never know what the NCAA is going to do about any particular thing, and their consistency is probably not a word I would associate with the NCAA, especially when it comes to Ohio State. So this could bring up an interesting battle. The good thing about this is Justin Fields, while he waits to hear whether or not he's eligible to play, he can practice. He can train with the team. He'll be, spring game eligible and all that. So it brings up an interesting battle now that you've got Tate Martell would be the heir apparent, and now you've got Justin Fields, who is, had he been, the recruit, had he come in as a normal recruit, would have been the highest recruit ever at Ohio State.
I certainly think this is going to bear watching, not only for the talent and the actual battle that will take place between Tate Martell and Justin Fields. And I don't want to shortchange Matthew Baldwin, because we talked about a lot of the departing seniors. They had rave reviews of Matthew Baldwin from the past summer. Now I'm not sure if he's 100% healthy from the knee injury he sustained late in his senior year.
Mm-hmm. But he'll be a red shirt freshman this year.
Right. So the reason I say it's going to bear watching, and Ryan Day certainly had to have had, he certainly must have had a lot of conversations with Justin Fields going into Justin Fields' decision to transfer. And I think how Ryan Day handles this for the locker room is going to be very, very important. I'm not suggesting that Justin Fields cannot possibly win this job, but I think it is imperative for, if I had the opportunity to be involved in it, is to make it where everyone is kind of starting out, like you said, Tate Martell is probably the heir apparent, but Justin Fields should not be given any preferential treatment. Mm-hmm. Even though he is, I certainly understand, highly touted recruit, and the fans are going to be clamoring for him like they always do with every highly touted recruit that signs with Ohio State. I think for the locker room, for the chemistry of those returning players that aren't in the quarterback room. I'm not really sure how beloved Tate Martell is by his teammates, but I would venture a guess that they believe that Tate Martell has paid his dues for the last few years. And rather than just say, okay, well, Justin Fields is going to be our starter, I think Justin Fields has to earn it. If he comes out and he shows he's the better quarterback, that's one thing. I just would hate to see or hear about players being disgruntled about the way that this is being handled.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Justin Fields, from what I know about him as a kid, he is a guy who's not going to necessarily expect it to be handed to him. He knows he's got a fight on his hands. Tate Martell has already made it very apparent what his position is on the starting quarterback spot for 2019. That it's his position, and he's going to do everything he can to retain that. So I think we're really looking at a great quarterback battle, and hopefully it doesn't turn into a controversy. Hopefully someone will emerge, and I think even if Tate Martell's teammates have a lot of respect for him, if Justin Fields comes in and earns the job the right way, ultimately as a player you want to win, and you want the guy in there that's going to give you the best chance to win. So I think that Justin Fields has the opportunity to win the locker room over if he does it on the field.
Yeah, it's certainly it happened. It's happened at other schools. Russell Wilson was a transfer from North Carolina State and went up to Wisconsin and did enough to not only earn the respect of his teammates, but was named a captain. So it certainly has been done. I think that when you talk about spring football, I enjoyed just kind of showing my age here. Like I remember going to the 1996 spring game and being excited because that was after Bob Hoying had left, and it was Stanley Jackson, and at the time Walt Harris was Ohio State's quarterback coach, and this hotshot recruit Mark Garcia, and it was okay. Well, who's gonna win the starting job? And the next thing you know, this skinny unknown quarterback came in and was kind of lighting it up, and his name is Joe Germain. So when you think about watching battles in the spring, that's why I'm not so sure that if I'm Tate Martell, we talked about this last week. If I'm Tate Martell, I'm going to do everything I can to battle Justin Fields and Matthew Baldwin and show that try and demonstrate to the coaching staff that they would be making a mistake by not naming him as the starter.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know that situation with Stan Jackson and Joe Germain was mismanaged.
Exactly. Precisely. Yeah.
Because Joe Germain was clearly the better quarterback. And there
he
was
certainly was. He certainly was.
You had for whatever reason, John Cooper just loved Stanley Jackson and wanted to get him minutes, or wanted to get him some playing time. So he kept having to deal with it, and I will never forget the interception he threw against Michigan in the end zone, and it haunts me to this day. That I'm traumatized by Stanley Jackson.
There you go.
Okay, so yeah, I am really looking forward to this. It really is, when you consider how good Matthew Baldwin's pedigree is. It really is an embarrassment of riches in the quarterback room for Ohio State, and that's considering they just had a redshirt sophomore declare for the NFL.
Right. I mean, and I saw on Twitter, because I had forgotten this, that it's been over 20 years since the last time the Big Ten has had a quarterback taken in the first round.
That's crazy.
Isn't it? I mean, it's, Kerry Collins of Penn State back in 1995 was the last quarterback taken in the first round. And, Ohio State, they can take some pride in the fact that Dwayne Haskins is certainly going to break that streak.
Well, let's hope that Haskins' pro career trends a little more like Tom Brady's and a little less like Kerry Collins's.
Certainly.
It's true, though. There have been a number of quarterbacks that have started games in the NFL, from the Big Ten, but no first rounders. I mean, you look at Kirk Cousins, and you look at some of the guys from Northwestern and Wisconsin that have come out, and Penn State that have made the NFL, but they haven't. None of them were first round picks, and none of them really have really wowed anybody. Cousins, I guess, probably is the best of that group, isn't he?
Yeah, probably.
In recent years.
Yeah, and you referenced Tom Brady. For all of the hoopla, fair or unfair, about Tom Brady, the simple fact is that the New England Patriots didn't draft him until the 6th round.
Yeah.
And they took other players prior to Tom Brady. So, that was just okay. Good fortune. Tom Brady turning out to be better than people obviously anticipated. So it really doesn't matter where you get picked, as long as that you make the most of your opportunity.
Yeah. All right, Chip. Let's talk about the coaching situation. A lot of stuff going on. It, of course, started with the promotion of Brian Hartline to full-time wide receiver coach, and the passing of the torch, the passing of the whistle, literally, from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day. And then things just started to get a little crazy. We saw Alex Grinch, who I would have bet a large amount of money would have been promoted to defensive coordinator with Schiano leaving, or not necessarily voluntarily. That's kind of how I saw things maybe going. But Alex Grinch left to take the defensive coordinator job at Oklahoma, and Ryan Day obviously is in the coaching staff meetings. He's part of the program. He saw what was going on. Maybe he determined that it wasn't just a Greg Schiano thing that was the problem with the defense or whatever. Maybe Grinch was just really disgruntled, thinking he would have been the man this past year, considering that everybody thought Schiano was leaving and didn't. Although through no fault of Schiano's, because that whole Tennessee debacle. What do you make of Alex Grinch going to Oklahoma?
I'm surprised, like you. I really thought of the two. I thought that I was under the impression last year that Alex Grinch came in. Maybe it was my misunderstanding, but I was under the impression that Alex Grinch kind of knew the score going into 2018, that Greg Schiano was unfairly kept from a head coaching position in 2018, but behind the scenes, I kind of got, the idea that, all right, don't worry, after 2018, Greg Schiano is going to move back, into being a head coach, or go back to the NFL, and it's going to be you're going to run the defense completely. The fact that Alex Grinch is an Ohio guy, played at Mount Union, all these things, I really would have thought that Alex Grinch was staying. Now, I'm not sure if it's accurate, but I saw some kind of an article about Alex Grinch making the statement that the reason why he did leave is that it wasn't just like 2 defensive coordinators, but it was 3, and he never really articulated who's the third person as far as the other defensive coordinator. But I wish him well. I'm glad that we referenced the idea of being able to make decisions for yourself. So he made the determination that going down to Oklahoma after 1 year in Columbus is something that appeals to him more. I certainly wish nothing but the best for Greg Schiano as well. Coach Day released a statement thanking Greg Schiano for all of his contributions, and it sounds like Greg Schiano is going to be going to the NFL in some capacity. He didn't really articulate a specific team. Maybe there are some teams that are going to be making some coaching moves once the playoffs and the Super Bowl conclude. So, yeah, a lot of surprises on the defensive side of the ball, to say the least.
Yeah, and before you started to kind of got to my next point about Schiano, the thing that was going through my mind was, my God, what if Bill Davis was the third defensive coordinator?
I would have to hope that maybe just based on his experience as a longtime coach, I want to say that I would think if there was like a third defensive coordinator that it would be Larry Johnson.
I agree.
I would think if that's the case, but yeah, I can't imagine that Bill Davis would be considered that third voice in the room.
Larry Johnson, Chip, is staying. He has been promoted. In fact, he adds associate head coach to his defensive line coach title. The best defensive line coach in the business, basically, from what everyone says. Certainly, both the Bosa brothers rave about him. His players love him. You could see it on the sideline. There was a picture that surfaced on Twitter. I don't know where it came from. Probably the wires, one of the wire services of Larry Johnson leaning in and giving Draymond Jones a hug during the fourth quarter of the Rose Bowl. Tremendous to have that guy back.
Absolutely. And I think when it's all said and done, that Coach Johnson, he should be able to leave Columbus on his own terms whenever that time comes.
Absolutely. So, the news came out today that Schiano was no longer part of the staff, as Ryan Day made a statement. So he and Grinch both gone. The co-defensive coordinators are out. Two new co-defensive coordinators in Jeff Hafley and Greg Madison. Of course, Greg Madison coming from that school up north. And I have to admit that over the last several years, when I looked at Michigan's coaching staff, Greg Madison was one of the few coaches that I thought I wouldn't mind him coaching for Ohio State.
Well, I referenced my father earlier in the podcast, and I remember something my dad said many, many years ago, and nothing to do with Ohio State, but just had to do with the coaching profession in general. And I remember my father saying something along the lines of how within coaching, it's almost like a fraternity of sorts, where it's kind of like if you know this guy or you worked with this guy, it's kind of, that it's kind of this thing where you eventually see people kind of sticking together. And Greg Madison, despite his age, when you started kind of connecting the dots, that's where Ryan Day worked with Greg Madison when they were both on the staff in Florida under Urban Meyer. And I'm not sure, it's still to be determined unless maybe some news has percolated out, since the time we started recording the podcast. It's still to be determined what Greg Madison's specific role is going to be, because I know he kind of made his mark as a defensive line coach, and Larry Johnson is well regarded as you said, the best defensive line coach in the country. So I'm not sure if Greg Madison, what position group, it's still to be determined that he may be coaching. But as you said, for example, Jeff Hafley is coming, and he's I think it was in the press release as the secondary coach. It didn't identify the entire secondary. So that kind of has me wondering, all right, well, what does that mean for Tabor Johnson? Is he safe? Is he not? You referenced Bill Davis. We don't really know, his fate has not been publicly determined.
Yeah. Ryan Day mentioned his defensive coaching staff and did not mention either Tabor Johnson or Bill Davis, which to me speaks volumes.
Oh, certainly, because it was one of these things where we referenced the idea of Dwayne Haskins. It's taking a long time for his news to depart from the NFL. We last week with as you said, the news of Brian Hartline being elevated to the permanent wide receivers coach. On the offensive side of the ball, like Mike Yursich from Oklahoma State was, named the passing game coordinator and the quarterback coach. So it seemed as though that on the offensive side of the ball, things were kind of there. I've read online that it seems more than likely that Greg Studrawa will be back, that Kevin Wilson, it seems, is going to be back. I'm not entirely sure about Tony Alford, but it would be a surprise, I guess, if he's not back. So the offensive side of the ball seemed a lot more secure. So I was kind of thinking, okay, well, maybe they're waiting for this next week, because I think there's maybe like an AFCA coaching convention going on, like maybe like they're trying to give the defensive coaches opportunities to find jobs rather than push them out. Like that Grinch, maybe he jumped very quickly because it was an offer too good to turn down. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see when it comes to, if like you said, it spoke volumes. Taylor Johnson, Bill Davis not being mentioned certainly leads you to believe that they're not in the future plans of Ryan Day.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I don't know for sure. I'm not positive what Jeff Hafley's specialty is in the defensive backfield. He has been the defensive backs coach for the San Francisco 49ers. According to some of the people that I trust on Twitter, he's supposedly, even though he's been out of the college game, he's supposedly a very good recruiter. And one of those sort of tireless guys and really energetic guys. But I'm not sure. I think overall, maybe he ends up being the overall secondary coach. Maybe they bring in a specialty coach for either the corners or the safeties, not sure which. And then I'm not sure, again, what Madison will be doing in terms of position coach. With Larry Johnson being such a great defensive line coach, I would think the natural thing would maybe be, sort of inside linebackers, or maybe something to do with the linebackers. But then again, there's a hole on the staff for linebacker coach. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out in terms of their roles and what they're in charge of. On the offensive side of the ball, you jumped ahead a little bit, but that's okay. Kevin Wilson, if he stays on, which it appears that's going to happen, and Mike Yurcich coming in as a passing game coordinator, I don't think they're bringing him in to just be a quarterback coach and draw up the passing plays. I think they're bringing him in to call plays. What do you think?
That certainly seems plausible. And for the last several years, even before Ryan Day was on the Ohio State coaching staff, Urban Meyer would often make the statement of, coaches, they have to understand that when they come in, they're running the Ohio State offense. That he would make something like, it was one of these things where this is our offense and they have to run our offense. Well, now that Urban Meyer is gone, I'm interested to see, as you said, okay, is Mike Yurcich going to be calling the plays, or is it going to be Kevin Wilson? But what is the Ohio State offense going to be? We referenced Justin Fields earlier. Is the zone read play dead, or is it just very very sick in terms of within the mindset of Ohio State football going forward under Ryan Day? Because I have to give Ryan Day a lot of credit. Is that the dust has not yet settled. We believe that on the offensive side that things are a lot more certain than on the defensive side. But Ryan Day is molding the coaching staff to suit his vision of what Ohio State football is going to look like in the near future. Mm-hmm. And I think that's critical for his success to not necessarily, to maintain a lot of the things that were successful for Urban Meyer, but to make his own imprint upon Ohio State football, because when the toe meets leather in the end of August, for that first game against Florida Atlantic, he has to make sure that he feels completely ready to go with coaches that he believes in and trusts in, and Greg Madison is certainly going to stand out on that coaching staff, because in comparison to the vast majority of the coaching staff, and I'm not entirely sure what Coach Johnson's age is, but I believe Tom Orr said that this coming season, Greg Madison's going to be 70 years old. Whereas, when you look at Ryan Day, being, like 40, he'll certainly kind of, stand out in that capacity.
So Ryan Day's a man. He's 40.
Ryan Day is a man, and he is 40. But yeah, I mean, it just kind of, the fact that, all right, Ryan Day was a graduate assistant, but that experience with Greg Madison made a positive impression. Even though the 49ers were terrible when Ryan Day was an assistant there with Jeff Hafley, that made an impression. The fact that he thinks very wisely and positively about Larry Johnson. That he's bringing in guys on the defensive side of the ball that he believes can help him win games.
Yeah. Well, here's a good question. If Mike Yurcich is the quarterback's coach and the passing game coordinator,
yes,
let's say Mike ends up calling plays. Maybe he's the primary play caller game day. What is Kevin Wilson's role at that point?
That's because he's also, I think he is as the running game coordinator and the tight ends coach, I think, in terms of like his official responsibilities. I think no, Kevin Wilson, I think he's going to have a voice in the game plan. I'm not sure if he's going to call plays. I'm sure it'll be hashed out, and I kind of envision Ryan Day articulating that, if not, in the next few days, just because recruiting and assembling the staff are paramount for Ryan Day. But I think, maybe during spring practice, like, we have no idea like what the spring practice schedule is going to look like over the last, I mean, sincerely, yeah. It's the kind of thing where, over the last several years, Ohio State fans like you and me have grown accustomed to having it spread out, with like only a couple practices, like over a period of, like a period of a month. And Ryan Day may want to go back to more of that traditional, okay, let's get it done in a couple weeks. Who's to say that Ryan Day, like he may do things completely differently. I certainly hope he relishes and embraces the spring game, because that is one of my family's annual traditions, and it's one of those things that kind of keeps me somewhat sane, knowing that, okay, football is it's a long way. I enjoyed your post, your tweet, but just knowing how many days it is until that Florida Atlantic game, like that kind of serves as something that kind of keeps me going, during the rough times, during the seemingly never ending baseball season of the summer.
Well, before you know it, people will be saying there's like Reed Fragel days till opening day and that kind of thing.
There you go.
All right, so it's going to be interesting to see how things shake out. I agree with you that Alford is probably back as running backs coach. Studrawa is a guy who I'm not sure. I think if anybody on the offensive coaching side of the ball is still to be replaced, I think he would be the leading candidate. He's a guy who, I mean, if you look at Ohio State's offensive line recruiting and the failure to close on some of those guys, that's maybe a little bit of a red flag, maybe a little bit of a hindrance in his ledger. But before you know it, Ryan Day will have his staff sorted out, and Ohio State will move forward fully into the new era. But I think taking Greg Madison from Michigan, I think, is going to hurt Michigan's defense, and that brings a smile to my face. And it remains to be seen how everything's going to work with Madison and Hafley as the co-defensive coordinators, and then of course Larry Johnson as an associate head coach. I'm sure is going to have quite a bit of input as well.
Greg Madison is, his claim to fame, besides working with Ryan Day, of course, is, he's had 2 tours of duty up at that team up north. Like, I remember in the early 90s under Gary Moeller, then he was at Notre Dame for a stretch, then he was at Florida, and then he came, I think, to the NFL, and then back to Michigan. So, he is well-traveled, but he is very well-respected, and those fans, at least on Twitter, they were not taking this news very well.
Yeah, another loss to Ohio State.
Yes.
Oh, man. All right. Well, the coaching madness is not over with yet, I suspect, and we'll the next time that you and I convene, whether that's in a couple of weeks or whatever, we will discuss it. But interesting to see both Greg Schiano and Alex Grinch out after this year, and especially when sort of the team finally began playing competent defense at the end of the season.
Well, I think he's now retired, but he still has his eye on what's going on with the Ohio State football program. The longtime beat writer Tim May had a tweet that said something about, it was not difficult to forecast these kind of changes after a season where you saw the defense give up so many big plays and so many points.
Yeah.
That Ryan Day, I credit Ryan Day for having the courage of his convictions to make necessary changes when it would have been very easy to kind of stay with the status quo in certain regards. He's molding the coaching staff into a group that he believes he can win with.
Let me ask you this: are you surprised as I am, that Chris Ash still has a job at Rutgers?
I am surprised, but I'm also pleased for him in the sense that I think Rutgers, they had fallen into such a state of complete disrepair that I think to be kind of trigger happy up there would have been a mistake. Now, I will suggest that I think this is it coming into 2019. I think, all right, this is all right. You've been here, and yeah, I know the program wasn't in great shakes when you arrived, but okay, we need to see some tangible results. And I'm not even going to suggest even necessarily a bowl game, but okay, we can do with a few less of the like the whitewashings from Ohio State and Michigan, and being somewhat more competitive, and if they can get to I think I would put his magic number at 5.
How's that? Has to win 5 games or more.
I'm gonna say 5 with and you can't get blown out by Ohio State and Michigan.
He's getting blown out by Ohio State and Michigan.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's so, but that's with Rutgers, I think I'm surprised that as you were asking me if I was surprised. I'm surprised that Rutgers is being patient, but I'm pleased that they're being patient because that is what what they need to recognize. All right, this is a major fixer upper, for lack of a better word. The program on the other side of the ledger that I'm surprised that they've been very patient is Illinois with Lovie Smith, and they just gave him an extension. So maybe they're seeing progress from their point of view. I think Rutgers is always going to be there. It's going to be tough sledding no matter what. Just the way that the divisions are laid out. I mean, you could make the same argument with Indiana. It's okay, how much progress can you? I mean, you and I are both old enough to remember, back in 30 years ago, that Indiana at one point, they were good enough to compete against Michigan and Ohio State. Like those days are, again, 30 years ago. That's a long time. And they pushed out Bill Mallory and never ever really recovered from that decision. And I think they're going to give Tom Allen a lot of time. But I definitely think, my long-winded answer to your very simple question about Chris Ash is I am surprised he got another year. I'm pleased that Rutgers is giving him another year, but I think this is it. I think I'm going to say 5, and and we'll see in terms of I have no idea when. I know that they don't play. Ohio State and Rutgers don't play until late in the season, so we'll see. And of course it'll be at Rutgers. So You know,
so you're saying there's a chance.
I'm saying there's a chance. I'm saying that they'll be firing off that cannon and just looking in. It's in the middle. It's in the middle of November. It's November 16th as I look at my planner. So I'm not sure if that falls outside that window of like night games, but certainly that Rutgers will do everything that they can to convince the television powers that be to make that a night game for Ohio State.
Good luck with that, Rutgers. I'm reminded of those tweets in the middle of the season when things were going so miserably for Rutgers, and Ohio State's defense was just a garbage, flaming garbage fire. That those tweets that said, Chris Ash for Greg Schiano, who says no? And literally, you couldn't think of anyone who would say no other than perhaps Chris Ash.
Certainly. Well, I will say, as far as Greg Schiano goes, the statement that Ryan Day put out, it sounds as though Greg Schiano is looking for opportunities within the NFL. And as I said a few moments ago, who's to say or suggest that maybe conversations have been had with other teams, that he's just kind of biding his time for after the NFL season to conclude and to move back. But in defense of Greg Schiano, with Manny Diaz reneging on his short-lived tenure to be the head coach at Temple, I think Temple would not be making a mistake if they put a call into Greg Schiano, because for all of Greg Schiano's shortcomings this past season, nobody can deny the great work he did when he was the head coach at Rutgers. And I think Greg Schiano would be a really good fit there. Recruiting-wise, I think he could kind of resuscitate his career. That team is certainly bowl caliber.
Mm-hmm. He knows that area. He recruits that area well.
Yeah. So, but it doesn't seem as though like Temple football is on Greg Schiano's mind.
Well, we'll see. It certainly wasn't on Manny Diaz's mind for very long once Miami called him. One of the more bizarre things this offseason, the sudden retirement of Mark Richt and then the subsequent call to Manny Diaz, who had just taken a new job and then was offered his dream job within just days. So crazy situation there, and it'll be interesting how that works out for all the teams involved. Chip, before we get out of here, we've been at this a long time. Before we get out of here, I wanted to get your take on Urban Meyer as an assistant athletic director. Ohio State has a myriad of assistant athletic directors doing various things. What do you see his role as, other than using his star power whenever recruits come in for a visit? What other things do you think that Gene Smith, his good friend Gene Smith, will be having him do for the Ohio State University?
Supposedly, he's going to be teaching a class on leadership, and I'm not sure what the official title is within the Ohio State class catalog. One of my nieces is a junior at Ohio State, and when we got together with our family for the holidays, she mentioned, it's a class that she would certainly like to take, but she knows that it's filling up and it's going to be very, very popular. So I certainly believe that Urban Meyer has earned the right to kind of be, I would say kind of be deployed in whatever way that he would prefer. Like if that is like to be kind of like that star attraction for recruits. I think I'm sure that Shelley Meyer would certainly relish the opportunity to take vacations, like the Buckeye Cruise for Cancer and all those kind of things, like all those kind of things. Like when this winter comes around, I know Shelley Meyer has there was an ESPN article that she doesn't want him to coach again, and I certainly don't think he will, but I think Urban Meyer is going to kind of find his niche, trying to cultivate leadership. Hopefully not. I mean this with no disrespect to Urban Meyer. Hopefully not within the football building, but within other athletic teams that may seek his advice and counsel. And the only reason I said hopefully not within the football program is, that's a pretty big shadow that Urban Meyer is going to that whenever he walks in the room And I think Ryan Day, he's trying to make his own mark as his own man and establish his own program. So I think Urban Meyer is going to give Ryan Day plenty of space. But yeah, I think teaching that leadership class, being around to be a sounding board for other athletic teams, and being the occasional television analyst. I think that those are the things that Urban Meyer is going to do as that associate athletic director, as you described him.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think he'll maybe be doing some of that, doing some consulting with some of the other programs to get some of the ones that are not quite up to snuff, maybe a little bit better organized, a little better leadership, maybe, as you mentioned. I think he'll be there as a resource. I think he'll largely be symbolic in that way, but I think he also may be having some fundraising tasks that he'd be asked to do, because I think he'd be very good at that. He's a very motivational guy, and if anybody can give a speech, you give the speech. A normal guy comes in, gives a speech, and everybody gives writes a check for $100. He comes in and gives a speech. Everybody's writing a check for $1,000.
Certainly, yeah. Anything that you can do. Like, let's face it. You talked about the idea, like the associate athletic director. Archie Griffin, is kind of, like that goodwill ambassador,
Mm-hmm.
For Ohio State, largely symbolic. Like I often think of, when it comes to Ohio State football, like Archie Griffin, and I realize that a lot of former players that played for Woody Hayes are still alive.
Yeah.
But I always, when I see Archie Griffin, I kind of think of him as like, okay, he's the bridge between today and the Woody Hayes era. Like in the case of Urban Meyer, he's his own bridge. Like he, like he basically is going to be largely symbolic of, like a glorious 7-year time that, saw Ohio State come back in glorious fashion. Winning the first ever college football playoff championship game.
All right, Chip. I don't know. I think you and I will probably talk offline about our next podcast. I think that the Silver Bullets podcast will probably. I'd like it to still be regular, but not quite as frequent in the off season. Maybe every 2 to 3 weeks, perhaps. But you and I will talk about that before we reconvene, and we'll let everybody know through our Twitter feeds. Your Twitter feed is what again?
My Twitter feed is at Chip Minnich. My last name is spelled Minnich. And like Michael, I'm a contributor to the Hayes and Cannon section on the ozone.net, as well as for Athlon Sports.
And I just want to let you know, Chip, that I didn't really forget your Twitter handle. I just wanted you to say it. So that was the kind of the setup.
I appreciate that.
And I am at Mike36fan. So follow us on Twitter, and follow the Silver Bullets podcast as well on Twitter. And we'll make sure we get word out on what our regular rotation will be. I guess the next thing up, Chip, that we would talk about when we come back is, the remainder of Ryan Day's staff will be known by then. We might have more recruiting news with finishing out the class. And of course, there's still probably a few juniors that maybe have a decision to make. I don't know that we've heard from Robert Landers, who would be a potential to go, but I don't expect that. I mean, certainly nobody that we really expect. There's Jonathan Cooper. We think he'll be back. Kendall Sheffield, maybe Damon Arnett, maybe those are two guys that might consider leaving. I don't think Dalen Hamilton will leave. I think Malik Harrison said he's coming back, right?
Certainly, yes.
Okay,
that's
so
correct.
Malik Harrison is back in the fold. I think that's about it. I'm really hoping Liam McCullough doesn't go pro. He's one of my favorite players. So
if not just for the T-shirts that he wears on check-in day.
Yes, let's keep Liam McCullough as long as we possibly can. Other than that, I just don't see it. I don't see anybody else that has that potential. Of course, KJ Hill is a guy that we're waiting on.
Right. And they've got about a week.
Yeah. So by the time we reconvene, we'll know. We don't expect CJ Saunders to go. there's another experienced guy who'll be back next year. So Zone 6 might be in pretty good hands, especially when you consider Chris Olave, his emergence late in the season.
Yeah, and that's not even counting, for example, like Garrett Wilson is now on campus. I mean, it's going to be an interesting year, to say the least.
Yeah, I'm excited about Garrett Wilson. I am. Okay, well, that should do it for another exciting award-winning episode of the Silver Bullets podcast. And of course, when I say award-winning, I mean every week Tony Gerdeman gives us the award Best Podcast that he's not involved in.
High praise.
Yeah. Speaking of Gerd, you can catch him on the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I don't know what their off-season schedule is going to be like, but they've been a pretty consistent Wednesday drop on the ozone.net. Sons of Schmidt, I believe, is going to be on hiatus as Brandon Zimmerman is seemingly stepping away from Hazen Cannon for a bit.
Yeah.
You have any further info on that, Chip?
No, it's still kind of to be determined. It's not really, anything, nothing bad or anything like that. But Brandon, in terms of, he kind of made behind the scenes it brought it to our attention that, his secret identity, real work life, is kind of causing him to kind of readjust some things. So I'm sure that those guys will regroup and get back to some kind of a regularly scheduled program in the very near future.
He's got a rough life. He's moving to Hawaii.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So he'll be able to go see all the Hawaii games in person, which is really cool. Did we just break news? Did we break news that Brandon was?
But that's. I mean, I'm sure he won't mind. He won't mind.
And of course, the Sloopcast. They've been a Monday, Friday staple. I don't know what their off-season schedule is going to be like, but catch all of the shows on the Ozone Radio Network and listen to their most recent one, and I'm sure they'll clue you in on what their plans are. I get the feeling that the Sloopcast guys are pretty voracious podcasters, no matter if it's in season or out of season.
Yeah, I think they always find something that they can talk about or describe.
Yeah, we're going to dial it back so that you and I can have a little bit of a life. I can actually move into my new home this weekend, and we can allow the listeners to get a little more free time on their hands and visit with their loved ones who have not seen them since college football kicked off back at the end of August, early September. But it's been really fun going through this first season with you, Chip. And I anticipate being back at the Silver Bullets podcast throughout 2019. But we'll dial it back, and you and I will figure out our frequency that we need to have, and then we'll come back strong in the fall.
Yeah, it's definitely been enjoyable with you, Michael, and look forward to figuring out what our off-season schedule is going to look like.
All right, that'll do it for this edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. I think there's nothing left to say except we'll see you soonish, and go Bucks.
Go Bucks.